Now, I truthfully do not believe in werewolves, but I sure enjoy playing them.
Yeah.
I mean, we know about the werewolf from, actually from the Bible.
The world remembers Chuck Connors as television's greatest cowboy. But the farther you look behind that legendary image, the harder it becomes to separate the hero from the man. Outside the cameras, the man behind Lucas McCain was living a story fans never saw. In between failed dreams, political controversy, unexpected friendships, and personal struggles, there was much more to his story than television ever revealed. So who was Chuck Connors when the cameras stopped rolling? And what parts of his life remained hidden for decades? Join us as we uncover the untold truth about the Rifleman's Chuck Connors, the man before the fame. Chuck Connors seemed like the kind of man who had been born to wear cowboy boots. Standing 6'5" tall with a commanding voice and an intimidating screen presence, he looked every bit like the rugged Western hero who could ride into danger without hesitation. But long before Hollywood transformed him into Lucas McCain, he was simply a young man from Brooklyn, chasing a completely different dream. He grew up during the hardships of the Great Depression. Money was scarce, and so were the opportunities around. However, one thing separated him from everyone else around him. He possessed extraordinary athletic ability. Sports quickly became his escape, his ambition, and eventually his ticket toward a better future. After earning an athletic scholarship to prep school, he continued playing both baseball and basketball at Seton Hall University. It was during those years that the nickname Chuck replaced the name Kevin. Teammates reportedly picked it up after constantly hearing him shout, "Chuck it to me!" across the baseball field. The name stuck, and before long, so did the reputation of a fierce competitor who hated losing more than almost anything else. Professional baseball soon came calling. He signed with the Brooklyn Dodgers organization, later reaching Major League Baseball with both the Dodgers and the Chicago Cubs. Around the same period, he also played professional basketball for the Boston Celtics, making him one of the very few athletes in history to compete professionally in both sports. However, his time in the major leagues was brief, and certainly not the legendary career he had imagined as a boy growing up in Brooklyn. Being sent back to the minor leagues was a crushing disappointment. For someone whose identity had been built around competition, it felt like a setback. Yet looking back years later, that setback may have been the greatest turning point of his entire life. While playing for a minor league club in Southern California, his personality attracted attention almost as much as his athletic ability. According to longtime accounts, a Hollywood talent scout noticed the charismatic first baseman entertaining teammates in the dugout and thought he belonged in front of a camera. It was an unlikely opportunity, but Chuck decided to take the chance. What made the transition even more remarkable was how naturally he adapted to the entertainment industry. Unlike many athletes who struggled in front of the camera, Chuck possessed confidence, humor, and a commanding presence that directors immediately noticed. Years of performing before thousands of spectators had given him an ease under pressure that translated surprisingly well to acting. Without realizing it, he had been preparing for Hollywood long before anyone ever offered him a script. His first appearance came in the 1952 film Pat and Mike, starring Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. More supporting roles followed, including Old Yeller, where his performance as a strong but compassionate father caught the attention of television producers searching for the perfect leading man. Ironically, the athletic career he once considered a disappointment had quietly led him to the role that would change his life forever. But becoming television's most admired father came with an unexpected cost. Behind the image of the fearless rifleman was a man whose real life was far more complicated than audiences ever imagined. So who was Chuck Connors once the cameras stopped rolling? The father America grew to love. By the late 1950s, Television audiences were becoming spoiled for choice when it came to westerns. Cowboys, lawmen, and outlaws dominated primetime, and many industry insiders believed the genre had already reached its peak. In fact, some people reportedly advised Chuck Connors not to accept another Western role because they believed the market was becoming oversaturated. Fortunately for him, he completely ignored that advice. When The Rifleman premiered in 1958, it immediately stood apart from the countless Westerns competing for viewers' attention. While there were gunfights, horseback chases, and dramatic showdowns, those weren't the heart of the series. At its core, the show was about a widowed father doing everything he could to raise a good son in a dangerous world. That emotional foundation made the series feel different, and audiences connected with it almost instantly. Chuck played Lucas McCain effortlessly. He could stop a criminal with his customized Winchester rifle one moment, then patiently teach his son a lesson about honesty, courage, or forgiveness the next. Week after week, viewers watched a man who believed strength meant far more than winning a fight. It meant leading by example. In many homes across America, Lucas McCain became the kind of father people admired and hoped to emulate. Many parents even viewed the series as a yardstick to emulate. Lucas McCain wasn't portrayed as a perfect father. He made mistakes, admitted when he was wrong, and tried to teach Mark how to become a good man, rather than simply a tough one. Those lessons gave the show an emotional depth that separated it from many of the westerns airing alongside it, helping transform it into a classic that continues finding new audiences decades later. A huge part of that success came from the chemistry between Chuck and his young co-star, Johnny Crawford, who portrayed Mark McCain. Their relationship felt remarkably genuine because, in many ways, it was. While cameras captured their bond on screen, that connection continued long after filming ended each day. Rather than treating Crawford like just another child actor, Connors reportedly took him under his wing. He invited him on camping trips with his own sons, offered advice whenever he could, and made sure the young actor felt included. Crawford would later recall that Chuck looked after him with the same patience and kindness audiences saw on television. The father-son relationship people admired every week had grown into a genuine friendship. Success, however, came with an unexpected price. The more audiences embraced Lucas McCain, the harder it became for them to separate the character from the actor. It's one of Hollywood's oldest ironies. The role that makes an actor unforgettable can also become impossible to escape. For Chuck, Lucas McCain slowly became a shadow that followed him everywhere. Fans expected him to be the same steady, principled man they welcomed into their living rooms each week. But how much of that beloved television father was real, and how much was simply the role of a lifetime? As his fame grew, the difference between Chuck Connors and Lucas McCain became increasingly difficult to see. And the truth behind that image was far more surprising than anyone expected. The side Hollywood rarely talked about. To most fans, Chuck Connors represented old-fashioned American values. He was the dependable cowboy who defended the innocent, respected family, and always seemed to know the right thing to do. That image became so deeply rooted that many people assumed the actor behind Lucas McCain lived exactly the same way. But once the cameras stopped rolling, his life became far more complicated. Unlike many Hollywood stars of his era, Chuck never tried to hide where he stood politically, as he was remarkably outspoken. He identified as a committed conservative and openly supported several Republican candidates throughout his life. Those views occasionally placed him at odds with parts of Hollywood, where political opinions were becoming increasingly polarized. What surprised people even more was the company he kept. Despite his conservative beliefs and patriotic public image, Chuck developed friendships that crossed political and ideological boundaries in ways few expected. One of the most famous examples came during the height of the Cold War. In 1973, while visiting the Soviet Union, Chuck met Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev. The encounter could have been nothing more than a routine diplomatic photo opportunity. Instead, the two men reportedly formed an unexpected friendship. Brezhnev was said to be an admirer of the Rifleman and welcomed Chuck warmly during his visit. Over the following years, the actor visited the Soviet leader several times, with reports suggesting the two exchanged gifts and maintained friendly correspondence. For many Americans living through one of history's most tense political rivalries, it was almost impossible to imagine television's favorite cowboy being cordial with the leader of America's biggest adversary. The friendship puzzled both political observers and fans. But Chuck, however, appeared largely unaffected by the criticism. Those who knew him often described him as someone who judged people individually rather than strictly through political labels. His personal life proved even more complicated than the wholesome image audiences had embraced for years. Over the course of his life, Chuck married 3 times, and each relationship eventually came to an end. His first marriage to Elizabeth Riddell lasted more than 2 decades and produced 4 sons before the couple divorced in the early 1960s. He later married Kamala Devi, an actress he met while filming Geronimo. Although they appeared happy together publicly, that marriage also ended after several years. A third marriage followed, but it too eventually came to an end. While Chuck rarely spoke publicly in detail about his divorces, those close to him suggested that the demands of a busy acting career, constant travel, and life in the public eye often placed enormous strain on his relationships. The dependable family man viewers admired each week was, in reality, navigating many of the same personal struggles faced by countless ordinary families. Yet those who worked alongside him frequently remembered a different side altogether. Cast members and crew often described him as generous, approachable, and surprisingly funny between takes. He loved practical jokes, enjoyed entertaining everyone on set, and possessed the same vibrant personality that had first caught Hollywood's attention years earlier on a baseball field. It was that warmth, many believed, that made him so naturally believable as Lucas McCain. Still, no amount of charm could completely shield him from the realities of getting older. As television changed, westerns began fading from popularity, and Hollywood started looking for a different kind of leading man. The spotlight that had once followed him everywhere slowly began to move on. What happens when the character everyone loves becomes more famous than the person who played him? The answer would shape the final chapter of Chuck Connors' life in ways few fans ever realized. The role he could never escape. When The Rifleman ended in 1963 after 5 successful seasons and 168 episodes, he was only in his early 40s. He still had decades of acting ahead of him, and many believed Hollywood would easily transition him into another leading role. Instead, he found himself carrying the weight of Lucas McCain everywhere he went. Producers admired him, but many couldn't look past the cowboy hat. Viewers felt the same way. Whether he appeared in a war film, a crime drama, or another television series, audiences instinctively saw the Rifleman. The very role that had made him famous had quietly become a prison. Yet, it didn't mean he stopped working. He starred in the Western series Branded, playing Captain Jason McCord, a cavalry officer who had been wrongly accused of cowardice and forced to rebuild his reputation. The role had emotional depth and gave Chuck an opportunity to portray another honorable man fighting against public judgment. Critics appreciated his performance, but the series never captured the cultural impact of The Rifleman. After only 2 seasons, it came to an end. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Chuck continued appearing in both television and film. He accepted a wide variety of roles, refusing to disappear quietly from Hollywood. One of his most memorable later performances came in the groundbreaking miniseries Roots, where he portrayed the ruthless slave owner Tom Moore. It was a dramatic departure from the heroic characters audiences associated with him, and his performance earned an Emmy Award nomination. He also appeared alongside major stars in films such as Soylent Green, proving he could adapt beyond the Western genre. Yet despite these accomplishments, nothing ever eclipsed the legacy of Lucas McCain. Interview after interview eventually circled back to the same questions about the Rifleman. It became increasingly clear that no matter how many new characters he played, that one role would always define him. He also deliberately avoided relying solely on nostalgia. Instead of spending the rest of his career making appearances as television's favorite cowboy, Chuck continued searching for roles that challenged both himself and his audience. Some projects succeeded, but others disappeared almost as quickly as they arrived. Yet, he rarely stopped working. Those around him often admired that determination. Even after reaching the kind of fame many actors spend a lifetime pursuing, he still approached new opportunities with the mindset of someone who had something left to prove. It reflected the same competitive spirit that had once driven him as a professional athlete, long before Hollywood ever called. Interestingly, Chuck never seemed bitter about that reality. Rather than distancing himself from the show, he embraced it. Friends and colleagues later recalled how proud he remained of the Rifleman and what it had meant to families across America. Unlike some actors who grew frustrated by typecasting, he appeared genuinely grateful that one role had touched so many lives. That gratitude became especially evident near the end of his career, when he was invited to step back into Lucas McCain's boots one final time. Then came one final return that nobody realized would become a farewell. Behind the cameras, a single quiet moment revealed just how much Lucas McCain had always meant to him. What happened when he put that cowboy hat on again? The goodbye behind the legend. By the early 1990s, Hollywood looked very different from the one Chuck Connors had conquered decades earlier. Younger stars had already taken center stage, and he was entering the final chapter of his journey. Yet one unexpected invitation reminded him that some legends never truly fade. In 1991, he returned to play Lucas McCain one last time in The Gambler Returns: The Luck of the Draw. For longtime viewers, it was a nostalgic reunion that quickly became much more emotional than anyone expected. Director Burt Kennedy later recalled watching Connors search through the wardrobe until he found a hat that reminded him of the one Lucas McCain had worn throughout The Rifleman. For decades, Chuck had worked tirelessly to prove he had more than one television role. He had acted in dramas, war films, thrillers, and even earned praise for playing characters completely unlike Lucas McCain. He had built friendships with world leaders, remained outspoken about his political beliefs, and lived a life far more complicated than the wholesome cowboy millions believed they knew. Yet in the end, it was Lucas McCain who continued bringing audiences back to him. There was something quite distinctive about that reality. The role he had once worried might limit his career ultimately became the one that preserved it. Generations who had never watched his baseball games, followed his political views, or even recognized many of his later films still knew exactly who Lucas McCain was. The character had outgrown television and become part of American popular culture, ensuring that Chuck would never truly disappear from the public memory, no matter how much time passed. Not long afterward, his health began to decline. After years of smoking, he was diagnosed with lung cancer. His condition worsened following complications from pneumonia, and on November 10, 1992, Chuck Connors passed away at the age of 71. For many fans, it felt like losing more than an actor. It felt like saying goodbye to a father figure who had quietly helped shape an entire generation. Perhaps no farewell captured that feeling better than Johnny Crawford's. The boy who had played Mark McCain stood before mourners and delivered an emotional tribute to the man he had considered family for much of his life. Fighting back tears, he described Chuck as loyal, generous, and deeply caring before summing up decades of friendship with a simple sentence: "He was just a great guy." Those words carried unusual weight because they came from someone who had experienced both sides of Chuck Connors, the television legend admired by millions and the man behind the cameras known by only a few. He wasn't simply the perfect cowboy audiences watched every week, nor was he merely the controversial public figure revealed through later headlines. He was a gifted athlete who reinvented himself, a devoted mentor to many, a man unafraid to hold unpopular opinions, and an actor who spent a lifetime trying to step out of one unforgettable shadow. More than 30 years after his passing, people still remember Lucas McCain. But perhaps remembering Chuck Connors means accepting something even more interesting: that the real man was far more complicated and far more human than the legend ever allowed us to see. Do you think learning about a celebrity's private life changes the way you see the characters they played on screen? And if someone spent decades inspiring millions, but also lived a deeply complicated life, should they be remembered more for their flaws or for the legacy they left behind? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.